Everyone, Ollie here, and this is the 12th edition of Olly Ranks, where I'll be ranking season 12 of classic Doctor Who. So, season 12 is the debut season of Tom Baker's fourth Doctor, and he'll remain in the role for another 7 years. Yeah, so at the start of this season, Barry Letts steps down as the producer and the producer role is taken over by Philip Hinchcliffe, which is actually one of the more popular areas in the Doctor in classic Who because of the whole gothic horror elements that he incorporated in his stories and all that. So, season 12 also sees the debut of Ian Marter as Harry Sullivan, and Ian Marter previously appeared in the third Doctor story, Carnival of Monsters, so he returns in the more full-time capacity now, and obviously Sarah Jane Smith returns as well as units, even though it's for one story. But as you can see from Robot, they don't appear in any other story until Terror of the Zygons in the following season. So if you're not familiar with how this works, I'll be ranking the season 12 stories from my least favorite to my favorite story of the season, and I'll explain the reasons why I gave that ranking. In fifth place is Revenge of the Cybermen. I wasn't really a big fan of this story because it actually had a lot of potential to be a good story, but the execution was pretty much ruined the entire story, and the pacing as well. I mean, the pacing was very uneven, especially in like the beginning, but it actually got better-ish towards the end. I can say that, but it just overall was not a very good story to see this. I mean, it could have been good, but it just wasn't that good. Now we also see the return of the Cybermen, as the title suggests, and I feel they weren't used to their full potential. The Cybermen weren't at all threatening, plus they've sounded very un-Cybermen-like. And obviously, one highlight of the story was pretty much Harry Sullivan is an imbecile, and I think the acting was rather good as well. And the side villains were decent as well, but it wasn't enough to pretty much save the story. But if the acting was crap, or not crap, if the acting wasn't as subpar and the script was just meh, it would just probably one of the worst stories ever. So I gave for that story a 4.5 out of 10. In fourth place is Sontaran Experiment. A fairly good story, but it's just a filler story that's just sandwiched in between The Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks. Great performances there, and we see the return of the Sontarans, well, two Sontarans, both played by Kevin Lindsay, who played Lynx in The Time Warrior. The story was shot entirely on location, and it actually worked, and it was set very much immediately after The Ark in Space, and it's set around the same time period as well, so that works. Phil Major Star was a good villain, but not as good as Lynx, but he did his best. And we also had, I think it was the Marshal as well, also played by Kevin Lindsay. He only appeared like on the screen, but he did his best, I guess. Tom Baker did a very good job, even though he pretty much suffered a collarbone injury, and he pretty much had to like wear his scarf around his neck throughout the whole story, and he had that big overcoat that he doesn't really wear outside other places. But to be honest, I think the story would have been better if it was a 4-parter instead of the 2-parters, because as I mentioned in my review, like like part 1 was pretty much paced as if it was going to be like a 4-parter, but then part 2 comes along and it just pretty much just kind of it did feel a little bit rushed, but could have been better. I mean, if it was like a 4-parter, probably been like a 9 out of 10 or something, but I give the story a 7 out of 10. This is Robot. Tom Baker's debut story, and it really set the bar high for great stories in the Tom Baker era. I think Tom Baker definitely had a very energetic performance and in his energetic debut, and it pretty much established the Fourth Doctor's character straight away, even though he does go through a bit of a character change in the following story, The Ark in Space, which was still very good as well, I guess. But he really had some. I think his energetic performance definitely paved the way for some iconic moments in this story, which I actually mentioned in my review. The K1 Robot was a good anti-villain, and I actually like the conflict it had between his love for his creator, Professor Kettlewell, and other external factors like the think tank program for Patricia Winters, who was actually a very good villain. I think probably one of the best female villains in classic Who, to be honest. The pacing was fine. Great performances by Elizabeth Sladen and the re-debuting Ian Marter as Harry Sullivan. It was a very fun story and a great post-generation story for season 12, and it was definitely a great way to kick off the season. And then obviously Robot is the end of the producing editing duo era of Barry Letts and Terrence Dicks, and I gave that story a 9 out of 10. In second place is The Ark in Space. Yes, another iconic story for the Tom Baker era and classic overall. A very atmospheric story which actually kicks off the producing, editing, script editing duo of Tom Baker, Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes. They had some very great moments in the story, such as one of my favorite speeches in Classic Who, the Doctor's human race speech, and then actually Tom Baker did that with such, man, it was beautiful. And I don't blame Tom Baker for saying that naming the Ark in Space, it was his favorite episode that he actually filmed, and I must say, I think part one is definitely a very great start off to the story because it pretty much has Tom Baker, Elizabeth Sladen, and Ian Mott just pretty much exploring the spaceship and exploring the beacon. It was very good. It definitely carried that aspect, carried the story, and the Ririn was a great villain as well as Noah. And I actually liked the scene where Noah was slowly transforming into the Ririn, and obviously had the green bubble wrapped around him, and you just see him like transforming. Even for the 70s, the effects were very cool. Even though they used bubble wrap, but it's still pretty cool and it's quite scary as well. I mean, if you watched it in the 70s, it'd probably been scary, but if this story is pretty much done now, they'll probably use some CGI stuff, and it actually worked. Although I must say there was a pacing issue around part 2, but I can overlook that, and I gave The Ark in Space a 9.5 out of 10. First place is no other than Genesis of the Daleks. No surprise there. Genesis of the Daleks is without a doubt one of the best, if not the best, in the story of the 57-year history of Doctor Who. It gave us a great deal of iconic moments, as well as giving us Davros, the maker of the creator of the Daleks, and a plot that and it introduced us into a plot that will be continued into 80s classic Who, especially with the whole Dalek civil war between the Imperial Daleks and the Renegade Daleks. I could literally go on forever on what makes the story brilliant, but I pretty much went on forever in my review. There are a lot of great performances in the story, such as Tom Baker, and I think this is definitely his best performance as the Fourth Doctor, especially with his Do I Have the Right speech. And Elizabeth Sladen, I say this is her best performance as Sarah Jane as well, and including her part in the Do I Have the Right speech, when she was pretty much persuading the Doctor to go ahead and kill the Daleks. We also have Michael Wisher as Davros, and he was actually he was actually great as Davros. I mean, not as great as Terry Malloy, who's actually my favorite Davros, but he still did a good job and pretty much portrayed the madness that Davros actually had, and how he really wanted the Daleks to do well and pretty much conquer the whole universe with him at their side. The side casts are great as well, especially Nyder, the secondary villain. I think he was quite wormy, and and I actually hated him and hated him in a good way, not in that other way, but he was still a good villain to say the least. And also the Daleks here were quite good. I think a lot of people criticize this story because the Daleks don't really do much, but I don't really think it's fair because this is the Daleks at their genesis, so they obviously can't do a whole lot. But it's still but this is pretty much a Davros story, more than most of it is a Dalek story. But hey, and as I actually mentioned before, Genesis of the Daleks actually predates every Dalek story ever made between the Daleks, the first ever Dalek story, and Death to the Daleks, and obviously I explained and I just spoke about it a little bit more in that review, but yeah, so I really like how important this story actually is to the Dalek mythology and Doctor Who overall, because the events of this story was pretty much a major factor in what caused the time war between the Daleks and the Time Lords. And so I gave Genesis of the Daleks a perfect 10 out of 10. So to conclude this ranking video, Season 12 is undoubtedly one of Classic Who's best seasons. I can see why it's a fan favourite. Tom Baker had a great debut season. I think it's definitely one of the best debut seasons for a Doctor ever. Overlooking the misfire that's Revenge of the Cybermen, it's still a very enjoyable season. I give Season 12 an A+. My next set of reviews will be Tom Baker's second season, Season 13, starting off with Terror of the Zygons. I'll be doing some review. I think I may be looking into doing the Justice League movies, especially the Joss Whedon one and the Zack Snyder one that came out just last month, or was it March, towards the end of March. But now when I watch that, I'll probably get those reviews done with. So thanks for watching this ranking video. Please let me know what you thought of season 12 and this video as well. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and join my Discord server in the description below. Until then, see you later.